What's up, guys? This is Ryan Fee from upswingpoker.com, and what we're going to be doing in this video is reviewing a hand that was played a couple nights ago on Poker Night in America between Matt Berkey and Chance Kornuth. The action is going to start with Bill Perkins in the cutoff. Right now they're playing 100, 200, 400, so a three blind structure with, I believe, a $200 ante. Perkins opens to 2,000 with 3-2 of hearts, and the action folds around to Berkey in the 100, who calls with ace-jack of diamonds. I actually don't like this play. I think you should definitely 3-bet. First of all, Perkins is a very loose player who's going to open a lot of hands, as you can sort of tell from the 3-2 of hearts in the cutoff. And even if he was a tight player, ace-jack of diamonds is going to fare really well as a 3-bet, especially when you're suited deep out of position. It's kind of a hand where even if you face a 4-bet, you could probably call and really not be in all that bad of shape. That's sort of on top of the fact that Berkey's in the 100, so by calling, he allows Chance in the 200 and the big blind to overcall and then force him to be in a multi-way out of position pot, which is very disadvantageous for him. Chance is in the 200 with pocket kings and makes a 3-bet to 10,000. They have, to start this hand, it looks like over 100K. And I mean, yeah, just in general, I think like as a standard, you're always going to be 3-betting kings here. I think a sizing to 10K is fine. That's probably about the smallest I would go. I think anywhere from 9 to 12K is a completely fine size. Perkins folds his 3-deuce, and Berkey calls with the ace-jack. Well, I think this is, in general, going to be a difficult pot for him. I do think it's okay for him to have a calling range here. If he's going to be flatting a hand as strong as ace-jack of diamonds, he'll probably have middle pocket pairs, other suited broadways, maybe ace-queen offsuit, and maybe some like stronger suited connectors like 10-9 or 8-9. And I think just given his pot odds, even though he's out of position, he can probably call with a narrow but fairly strong and tight range. The flop is 8-4-4 with 2 diamonds, and Berkey checks, as I'd likely expect him to do with all of his range. Chance opts to bets 12,000, which is a little bit more than half the pot with his pocket kings, which I think is a completely fine strategy. I think a smaller or bigger bet size would be fine as well, but they would have impacts on what we would potentially do on the turn and river. As played, Berkey decides to check raise to 35,000. At this point, I would estimate Berkey's range to be the nut flush draw probably, or maybe a small pair seeing where it's at. He could also have pocket aces that could have slow played from pre-flop, which I think is really unlikely, or pocket fours or pocket eights, which, while possible, are just generally unlikely given how few combos of those hands exist after the flop. I think Berkey's check raise on the flop is okay. It's probably not the move that I would make, but it's hard to go that wrong when you flop that big. I think because Chance is likely to have a bit more of a polarized range because of his 3-bet pre-flop, and like a narrow and polarized range, consisting of some bluffs, but mostly just really strong hands, and not too many hands in the middle. I tend to think that favors the check call over the check raise. I think that oftentimes when you check raise, all you really end up doing is playing a big pot with either a hand that you're maybe flipping with or a hand that you're slightly behind. And what will actually happen given their stack sizes is that you'll face a lot of calls and then be in a tough spot on the turn. One sort of final thought about Berkey's check raise is that this check raise could easily represent either only the nut flush draw or only the nut flush draw and pocket eights. While he may in theory be able to have other hands in his range, I do think it's possible that the only hand he might ever check raise here is the nut flush draw and then maybe a boat. Chance calls a check raise, and despite what the commentators say, I actually think this is the best play. After he calls this raise, they still have another 90,000 to play for, which is going to be about a pot-sized bet. And I think by calling, you're able to maximize all of the value of position. Now, all of a sudden, when Berkey has a flush draw and misses, or really has any other hand other than a boat or makes the flush on the turn, he's going to be in a tough spot. What's more, if he has a hand like 5s, 6s, or 10s, and he was trying to see where he's at, he hasn't really found that out by you calling. You could have definitely bet called the flop with a weak hand like ace-king, complete airball like queen-jack, or a strong hand like aces or kings. Also, just to sort of add on to that note, I will say that both Berkey and Chance have reputations for being, let's say, exploitative players and like to make reads in big moves. Given that they're so deep, this is certainly a spot where, to a very certain extent, you can throw a bit of theory out the window and take the gloves off and play some poker. Contrary to what Chino thinks, what card comes definitely matters. If the turn's a 4, chances are Berkey's not going to be willing to put in that much more money. If it's an ace or a diamond, especially an ace, there's a good chance that Chance won't be willing to commit the rest of his chips. That said, I think just like listening to him talk gives you a good insight into his psychology. I think that the way that he plays is once a pot gets so big, he's going to be always putting his money in, not realizing that he might not necessarily have the equity to do so. So yeah, I don't know, if you play with like live players, that could, that's definitely a way that they could think, is that sort of once a pot gets to a certain size, they're always going to put their money in. What that means for you is that once you identify one of these players and you get into a big pot with them, chances are it's a good time to turn off all your bluffs. Again, real quick to qualify, the graphics at the bottom of the screen are actually wrong. Chance doesn't have 50k, he has 90k on the turn. The turn's a jack and Berkey checks. I actually really like this play from him. I think that if he were to bet, basically only better hands would continue to put money into the pot, and he would just get his next 90,000 in with like somewhere between 30 and 40% equity. Probably just 30% equity. So I don't think that makes very much sense. That said, Chance could have easily bet called this flop with, again, a hand like 6-7, 10-9, or ace-king, and can now potentially look to turn that hand into a bluff. The action checks over to Chance, who then bets 20k into a pot of about 90k. And I think this is a good play. I think that this puts Berkey in a tough spot. If he has a nut flush draw, he's going to get the odds to call. But if he doesn't have the nut flush draw, if he has a hand like pocket nines, 8x, ace queen, if he turned a jack, he actually won't have the odds to call. What this does is it really utilizes the edge of position, or the advantage of position that Chance has here. If he were to bet call the flop with a weak hand or like almost nothing, he would essentially be offering himself a really cheap bluff, as there's a good chance that if Berkey has a range that check raises that isn't the nut flush draw, he'll have some air hands, and they're going to be in a really tough spot versus this really small this really small turn bet that gives Chance the ability to essentially bluff him. That said, given that it is very likely that Berkey would have check raised the flop with the nut flush draw for like ace-10, ace-jack, or ace-queen of diamonds, and probably would have checked the turn, I think it makes a lot of sense to go just slightly bigger here to make that check call slightly less profitable. The river's a 3 of diamonds that gives Berkey the nut flush, and he very quickly just goes all in. At this point, they have about 70k effective on the river, so it's quite the decision for Chance. He loses to jacks, 8s, and the nut flush, and beats 10-9 that isn't diamonds, 5s, 10s, or like ace, king, or queen. So some really weird sort of wonky hands. That said, like I said, I think hopefully at the beginning of this video, Berkey has been known to make some very unconventional plays, both pre-flop and post-flop. So in my opinion, it's not impossible that Berkey shows up here with a hand that is bluffing and would, potentially run it this way. Chance is in kind of a tough spot because he has kings with the king of diamonds. He's making it a little bit less likely that Berkey has a flush. That said, it's very possible that Berkey would never have the flush with the king of diamonds, as the only king of diamonds flushes I guess he could maybe have are king queen and king jack, which might not check raise the flop. Chance goes in the tank, plays with his chips, looks at his cards, and then stares down Berkey and tries to get a live read, which is something he prides himself in. For me, however, I would look at the math of the situation. If we call, the total pot will be 270,000, and we have to call about 70k to win that 270. That means we're going to need to have the best hand a little over a quarter of the time to be good. Even if we expect to profitably call. Even if we expect Berkey to show up with the best hand 60% of the time, it would still be a slam dunk profitable call, as we would win 40%, but we only need to be good, like I said, about 27% of the time. Given the pot odds of the situation and Berkey's unpredictable nature, I think I would have made the call here. That said, Chance is really good at reading players live, and I'm surprised that he was able to be fooled by Berkey's all-in jam with a value bet of a flush.